today, and what we're going to be just in a moment. We're going to watch the lineage video, which is the story of the Reformation, very powerful history of the Reformation. We're going to be watching that, and then right after that, Pastor Anderson will be speaking. Unfortunately, in the bulletin you notice his name is not in there because I neglected to let Audrey know who was speaking, and she just assumed it was me. But I'm thankful that the Lord has put a message on Pastor Al Anderson's heart to share the good news about ADRA, Adventist World Radio, and he'll be going into much more detail. He began his ministry in 1979, so he's been pastoring full-time or part-time, full-time for many years. I'm not sure how long you've been retired.
I retired in 62.
Retired in 62?
Yeah.
No, when you were 62 or in 1960?
I was 62.
When he was 62, and he's 63 now, so it's not that many years ago. Just retired, newly retired, at any rate. But he's in ministry all the time, 40 years since he began sharing the love of Christ in ministries of various different natures, and we appreciate him very much. We're really looking forward to the message that God has put on your heart to share with us today about Adventist World Radio.
Dowd was a heroic figure who lived in the 5th and 6th centuries and was director of Christianity in England and Wales around the time of the beginning of the 1260-year prophecy in 538, and led the church during its critical encounter with Augustine, the founder of the Papal Church in Britain. He was a contemporary of Columba and had received his training from him. Here in Bangor-on-Dee in Wales, a training institute was established that would be key in establishing this country as a mighty force for truth and resisting the advances of Rome for centuries. The school here in Bangor was not a small one with just 20 or 30 students, but it would have had hundreds and at times thousands of students. There was one particular story. Soon after the leaders of the Celtic Church had met with Augustine and rejected his teachings and authority, when 1,200 ministerial students from this school were slaughtered. The Welsh Church was one of the sturdiest and withstood much opposition to it, maintaining its stance the longest out of the churches in England, Scotland and Wales. They differed with Rome on many points, but the supremacy of the bishops, celibacy and the Sabbath were three of the main ones.
There is much evidence that the Sabbath prevailed in Wales universally until AD 115, when the first Roman bishop was seated at St. David's. The old Welsh Sabbath-keeping churches did not even then altogether bow the knee to Rome, but fled to their hiding places, where the ordinances of the gospel to this day have been administered in their primitive mode without being adulterated by the corrupt church of Rome.
So in the 6th and 7th centuries, we see a strong Celtic church. Patrick had been the evangelist in Ireland, Columba in Scotland, Aidan in England, and Dowd had established a training centre here in Wales. But the gospel would flow from these shores over to Europe through the ministry of a man called Columbanus. He was trained here in Bangor, and he would carry the light to France, Switzerland, Germany, and Italy, establishing training centers on the continent. The first place he established a school was in France. Here, along with 13 others who had come with him, these Celtic missionaries lived their lives, reading the scriptures and teaching other people. No longer did the youth of the land have to travel to Ireland, Scotland or Wales to receive training, but right in Europe they could receive an education of the highest standard. Soon this school became too small and he planted another one nearby, and then another one nearby, all within 20 miles of each other. Later on in his life, he would plant schools in Switzerland and in Germany.
Even as he was nearing the end of his life at 70 years old, he did not slow down. Now settling in Italy, he was joyfully received, and the commonality between the faith of the Celtic Church and that of the Waldensians was seen as he found a strong bond with the believers there. Refusing to enjoy a comfortable retirement, he asked the king for a place to plant a new center, and the locality of Bobbio, with its ruined church, was given him, and he established a school and library there. He died 1 year after founding the school in Bobbio, Italy, in the year 615 at the age of 72. He lived a faithful life, learning the gospel here in Wales and then dedicating his life to the spreading of the gospel in foreign lands, setting up mission institutes all over Europe. One thing that stands out to us from the life of Columbanus is that he worked for God all the way until the end. He didn't enjoy an easy retirement, but he kept pressing on. No matter who we are, whether we work for the church or whether we don't work for the church, whether we are employed, whether we're unemployed, whether we're old or whether we are young, let us be faithful to God wherever we are, using the talents God has given to us all the way until the end.
I'd like to ask you pray as we start. Father in heaven, as we think about what you have in store for each one of us and how the gospel can go all to the world, we'd ask that you'd guide us now with our thoughts. We ask in your precious name, Jesus, and amen. Have you ever thought of having a weapon? Now, when I'm in Minnesota, I go to Minnesota in the summer, I know that in that church, in the one church, one of the members comes with a weapon every Sabbath. I'm not kidding you, a gun. He's an ex-policeman. And then other churches I've been in, I know people have had weapons. But I have some weapons here too. But these are a different kind of weapon. I want you to open your Bibles to 2 Thessalonians. I'm going to read you something. 2 Thessalonians 10. And we're going to start at verse 3. I have 3 verses I want to read to you. 2 Thessalonians 10. And it says, though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God, to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations, and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringeth into captivity every thought to the obedience of God. These weapons are this. The radio. Now this radio is unique. In fact, this radio can go anywhere. It's solar powered right here. Then it has an antenna so you can get the radio. Has a wind up. And if I wind it up, oh, that's to scare away the bears or lions, wherever it might be. When I was in Africa, the women walk home and the men would walk home 5 and 10 miles at night in the really dark. And I know that I would have wanted to have a flashlight. So when I went over there, I took a lot of these shaking flashlights. Remember how they were? I'd take them so they'd have something walking along through the woods. You never know what kind of a snake's going to be there or whatever it is. I don't know about you. Maybe you're not afraid of snakes. But over there, they can be kind of scary. Like when I was living in Egypt, I saw this little snake. It looked about that long, skinny as a pencil. And I thought, well, what's it doing on my porch? I thought, well, I'll give you a kick. And then it went like this. And I said, oh no, I'm not touching you. It was a cobra, a little cobra. And I wasn't about to touch it. But there are, wherever you go around the world, I have seen a lot of scary snakes. And they are there. But this here flashlight, well, it'll be a flashlight too. So you can see where you're going. But when it winds up, you can also have it. But this is all our solar powered, I said. It's also has a battery in it, and then you can put it into your computer. So it's very flexible. Then we have another one here. This one here is a radio, but it's a little tiny one, and it's solar powered too. But this one here, you can press different numbers. You can get it in Spanish, you can get it in Arabic, whatever, the different countries with some verses and different. They're not all the Bible in it. And then I have one more, and this little thing is solar powered too, but it's like a recorder. It'll record, they say, between 800 and 1,000 hours. You can put the Bible, you can put life, health issues on this. And around the world, they need to hear about the health issues that we're having. This is so the exciting thing that we're going to be doing tomorrow. A lot of people are going to learning about health and how they can have a better life. In fact, we're going to see if they're, teach them about temperance even. Some people need to know about temperance. But I want to tell you some of the stories of ADRA. ADRA was started in 1971 just by one person, well, a man and a wife, and they went to Portugal and they thought they would last only... ADRA or AWR? AWR. Did I say ADRA? Yes. Oh, okay. Well, I've been involved in those too overseas. Anyway, but Adventist World Radio was started in 1971 in Portugal. And just a husband and wife, they went there and they thought it would be 1 year. Then they extended it for a number of years. But in the last 2 or 3 years, we have gotten really excited about what Jesus is going to do. I've been in with an ambassador for AWR about almost 2 years now. And we've gone in different places. We talked about what the world is doing and how God is working miracles. I want to tell you, there are so many miracles happening. In fact, one of the interesting ones is this radio type thing right here. In a country where we can't even get into, 6 times this has happened. As they were sitting in jungles areas, out of the jungle would walk a huge, a tall, beautiful looking creature, a man. And he would walk up, and in the one case, the man was sitting there watching his field because he had a spear in his hand because the monkeys or whatever would come in and steal his food. And so he was a chief, and he says, "What do you want?" And he holds the spear out. The man says, "I come here as a friend." And he says, "I want to give you a gift." And he gave him the radio. And he says, "Now, I want you to listen at sundown and at sunrise. And you'll hear beautiful program." And so this happened 6 times. And then this man would disappear. 6 times angels have come and shown people how to use this radio. We have people that are accepting. Now, one of the interesting things that is happening, though, if I can bring it out, and this, no, this is the wrong one, wrong pocket. I got some of my things in my pocket. Now, all of you have one of these, a cell phone. Now, my cell phone is not new enough, but I'm getting another one in another week, according to my son. But cell phone evangelism is going like wildfire around the world. Thousands of people have been baptized because of this cell phone. Now, all of you that have cell phone have people that you know. You talk to maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe 20, but you don't know how many maybe you have, maybe more than that. But if you use this cell phone and you say, "Look, I'm going to call my brother." I have a brother Dal. Now, my brother Dal is my little brother. He's the next tallest of my brothers, but he's also 13 years younger than me. And if only I could reach him with the gospel, because he is not an Adventist. He knows about it. But I've read and heard stories of this being a way to reach the children, our own brothers, our own sisters, because you can send them a message on it, and they can study the gospel through the cell phone. And over 200,000 people right now are using this as a reaching out to others. Over 200,000. And it's exciting when you think about that Jesus is coming soon. Now I want to tell you a story about Abraham. Now Abraham was a Maasai tribe member. Now Maasai tribes are mainly in Kenya and some of the other countries right around there. I've met them and seen them. But the Maasai tribe, this man was a good farmer, a good herdsman. And over there, the Maasai tribe believed that if you have lots of cattle, it's more important than having a wife. Anyway, that's the way they consider it. This cattle is so important. Well, this man had been listening to the meetings and thought about, oh, maybe I should go. So he went to the meeting and he became converted. This was just last year. And he listened to this meeting. He said, wow, this is what I need to do. I need to become a Seventh-day Adventist. And so as he listened, they told him, you need to pay tithe. Oh, well, tithe, what's that? Well, 10% of what you own. Well, he thought, well, okay, I've got quite a few cows and goats and sheep. And so he began. He took his cattle and put them in the pen. And every one, 1, 2, 3, up 9 of them. That one, that's the 10th one, that's a tithe. And he went through all of his cows. Then he went through with his sheep. Every 10th one was over here. And now all the goats, the 10th one were here. And they'd count up to $30,000. He gave $30,000 to the church. Well, the neighbors and his farmer friends, he says, you have to be crazy. But then something began to happen. 6 months later, his cows were having twins. The goats were having triplets. The goats were having triplets. And you know what happened? The neighbor said, hey, I want to become a tithe payer too, so I can be blessed. I mean, the Lord was working miracles. And then on top of that, they thought, oh, what are we going to do? Well, then they thought, well, we have to think about this thing. And then they started, wait a minute. And then he found out that the neighbors, there were so many cows, and there's not a lot of water in Kenya in some of the places. It's very dry. And so one of the chiefs owned a water hole. And so when the farmers would come up, he'd charge them to use the water their cattle. Well, Abraham says, you know what? I'll tell you what, I'll dig make a big water hole here, and I'll let them come here for free. And so he allowed the farmers come free, but they didn't get by with nothing. He says, I'm hiring a preacher. And so every time the cows came up there and the farmers sit there, and he'd preach to them and tell them about health and about God's love. And immediately they started liking that, and so it has a whole lot he's reached out. Now this Abraham has to be a great man. I'd love to meet him. You know what? As he found out that God was blessing him. Now on top of that, when Abraham was giving his cow, they said, this guy has to be kind of stupid, so we're going to steal his animals. And so they stole his cows, stole some of his sheep, some of his goats. The next morning, where do you think those goats and sheep were? Back in his own yard again. They'd steal and they'd come right back. Then after he started paying this 10% tithe, he says, you know, I'm going to start paying 20%. And so now he's paying 20% tithe. We could all do the same. My wife and I heard about this, and I thought the first time I heard it, I thought, how can you pay 20%? I thought that would be silly. But my wife and I have decided to do that. What we do is put the 10% into the church, and then we can put another 10% into the church experiences, like to put in the books and various things like that. And that way you can put 20% into the church. And you can't outgive the Lord, I can assure you. Now, when I first married my wife, in fact, last Tuesday, we had been married 42 years. And but I had gotten married, and I was teaching school at that time. This was before I was retired, before I was a pastor. And we got married during spring break, and I came back, and I didn't have any money. I had $100, and I didn't get paid for another 2 weeks. So what I did, I said, well, I understand the Lord pays balance. You know, you can't outgive the Lord. So I put my $100 into the envelope and paid my tithe. I didn't know how I was going to live. I didn't know she didn't have money. I didn't have any money. I didn't know where I would get any money to live for the next 2 weeks. But I was going to trust him. Well, I came home from church, opened my mailbox, and here was a letter from my brother Ben. Now, I was living in Washington State. My brother was living in Tennessee. When I opened the letter, I had $100 in the mailbox. Now, my brother has never given me any money before or afterwards either. I mean, that was rare that him giving me money. But I tell you, we can't outgive the Lord. God is so merciful. Now, you think of these things are strange, but now there was another man in Africa, and this man, he was very angry at his wife. He says, I don't want you to listen to AWR again. I don't want you to listen to that Adventist radio. Never. In fact, I'm going to put some other stations on your radio. So he takes his radio out, turns it. First radio. Good morning, this is AWR. Turns the next station, AWR. Every station he turns on is AWR. He couldn't get rid of the station. You see, God is blessing in many, many ways that we can't even understand. Now, you take in some of the countries where we're not able to reach. In fact, as you probably know, we have been working to try and work in North Korea. I don't know why North Korea. I've been to South Korea, and I've seen the border over where North Korea is. Well, I've never been to North Korea. But a while back, we decided we would have to do something to get the word into North Korea. So they put a bunch of these radios into some balloons, then put them with helium in them, and waited for the wind to go into North Korea. When the wind was blowing towards North Korea, they let them up, and they put 1,500 of them that floated into North Korea. So they got the gospel that way. See, God is putting these ideas into people's minds and heads. How can we get the gospel into the world? Now, I want to tell you about Kim. Kim was a teenager. I don't know exactly her age. I can't tell you the country either. But Kim had been going to school, and it was in a country where schooling is very important. So it had to be probably China. I would think it was China, but it could have been Korea or Vietnam. But she was really worried because in those countries, education is vital for survival and for good and for self-worth. And she went to school, and she was having trouble with math. Her math was terrible, and she was flunking. The teacher says, look, if you don't change now, you will not be able to get in school this next year. It's just that important. So she went home, and she thought, oh boy, what am I going to do? I can't tell my folks that in fact, she had one classmate that committed suicide because it did bad in school. Another one had run away from school or home. So she went home and said, well, I think I'll do it. And so she found where her father had a radio, and she picked it up and says, I'm going to listen to some popular music. It said it was rap music, but I don't know if they can get rap music here, but they said it was rap. And she was dialing the thing back and forth, and finally the voice says, are you discouraged? Are you depressed? She says, yeah, when? Are they reading my mind? And then she turned around and looked to make sure the door was locked and nobody was looking, because she was in a country where you can get in trouble. And so she listened to that and thought, wow, that sounds exciting. This went on. So every day after school, she'd run home quickly before her folks got home from work, and she'd listen to this radio and became listening to Adventist World Radio. In time, she listened after several months. She decided, I have to tell my dad, but she was able to find out a little address. She went and they sent her an address where other people were listening to the radio. And so she joined this group to listen to and pray with others. These other very secretly praying and grouping together. And she told her leader, I need to tell my father. Well, in the meantime, as she come home one day, her uncle was in the kitchen. And her uncle was, oh, those people that were Christian, oh, he was hollering and screaming. Well, calm down. Oh, he was just angry. He says, if it was my kid, I would disown him. I would send him out of the house or whatever. She thought, well, I hope he hasn't seen what I've been doing. And so her dad says, don't worry about it. He'll get over this. Well, anyway, she told her Bible or prayer group leader that she was going to tell her father. So a few days later, her father was sitting at the table, was doing some work, and she came in to her dad and says, I need to talk to you. Okay, sweetheart, what do you want? What's on your mind? Tell me. She says, Dad, I've been listening to your radio. Oh, okay. He didn't say anything. In fact, I've been listening to Adventist World Radio, and I believe in Jesus Christ, and I want to be a follower of Jesus Christ. Her dad didn't say anything. And she said, well, why doesn't he say something? So she went on to tell him a little more. And then pretty soon, he put his arms like this, dear, I have also been listening to Adventist Radio, and I have become a Christian. I was wondering how I was going to tell you. You see, this is the way it works. God is working miracles around the world. I mean, it doesn't matter where you go, it's working everywhere. Now, I'm going to tell you a very interesting thing that maybe it doesn't mean anything to you, but right now, you don't know how much God is doing. But 9 weeks ago, or 10 weeks ago, 10 weeks ago, I went by a radio station in DeLand, and I felt impressed I should go in and talk to them in the radio and see if I could put on a program. Now, I didn't know how to do that. I'd done it once before. But anyway, so 9 weeks ago, I went in and talked to them. They says, yeah, well, it'd be $50 for 15 minutes. Then she looked at me and says, no, I'll give it to you for $35 a minute. And I said, well, I'll see if I can work it out. And I called. So what I did, I went home and wrote out 15 minutes worth of work. And then I called my grandson, who lives in Minnesota, and I said, I want to try and do this on the radio. So I did my part. We went over, and it took us a couple hours or 3 hours to get 15 minutes right, with me sputtering and stuttering and everything else. And then he went and recorded it. And then I called him again. And then we come back, and then I put a flash drive in my computer. He comes back and loads it on my flash drive. He corrects me, and then he puts it on my flash drive, and then I take it to radio station. We've been doing that for 9 weeks. And I want to tell you that I haven't seen any results except the lady that runs the radio station. She says, I really like your station. My husband likes it. In fact, can I let my husband introduce you to the radio? Would you be willing to speak in other churches? You know, this is exciting when you find that somebody's responding. You don't always find them fault, but she has so much. In fact, she talked to my wife last night around 6:30, and she quits work at 4 o'clock. I don't know what she was calling about, but I want to tell you, God is working miracles. He wants people around the world to hear the good news. And what I've been doing on this 15 minutes, I try to give them some spiritual guidance, and then I tell them AWR stories. There are so many stories. In fact, I could go on for another 30 minutes and tell you just the marvelous stories of AWR. They're all over the world. In fact, here's another one that is recently. In a country I can't tell you because I don't know what the country is, but in North Africa, we know that it's in North Africa. One of our pastors had a small church there, and he picked up the phone, it rang, and he says, hello, this is, and the man says, yes, and he knew the name. As soon as he heard the name, he says, oh, wait a minute. The man says, I want you to come to my house. This man was the imam of the Muslim church for that whole area. He's a Muslim leader, in other words. And he was kind of scared. But he prayed quickly, and so on the appointed day, which was a couple of days later, he went, knocked on the door, and the man opened the door, says, come in. Then he closed the door and locked the door and put the key in his pocket. And then he was a little bit nervous. I don't know how you would feel, but you're locked in the house, and then locked and put the key in the pocket. Then he directed him down the hallway, farther down the hallway, and kind of gave him a little push into the next door. When he opened that door, there were 25 imams there. And he says, what do you want with me? And the man said, they said, we want to become Seventh-day Adventists. And he says, well, I have to teach you first. He says, we've been taught by an angel for several months now. See, angels are working where we can't go. God is working. And I can tell you one more, just like the same thing. In Ethiopia, one of our mission offices, or they got a phone call that says, I need you to come to my house and talk to me. And they knew that in this town, there were no Adventist churches or any members in that church of Ethiopia. But one of the pastors said, well, I can go. So he gets to the house, and a man says, oh, I'm glad you came. And this was a sheik. I guess that's how you say it. You know, a very important person. He says, come in. I'm glad you came. He says, I have my family here and friends here. And then he said, what do you want? They said, we want to become Seventh-day Adventists. And he says, I need to tell you. He said, well, we've been studying with an angel for 3 months. We know all that you can teach us. And in both cases where the angel been, they were able to answer all the questions about the Adventist church. I'm going to tell you, Jesus is coming. I have no doubt about it. There is not, in fact, I would doubt if we have that long of time left. I think it's going to happen very, very soon. I think events are happening so quickly and rapidly that Jesus is coming. We need to say, look, do we study this book? We need to be studying this book like it was never studied before. Both as Daniel and Revelation. These are the 2 most important books that we can study. We need to be studying them like we have never studied them before. We need to get together with your family, with your friends, with your husband, your wife. And that's what my wife and I have been doing. We've been studying. We've read through the Bible now once, and we've gone through it again, reading. And I would advise you to do the same. It's kind of exciting. We got a paper we read, and I read part, and then my wife reads part. We read out loud to each other. And we've gone through the Bible, and we're through the Bible the second time. We've been going since January, I think it's been. But it's exciting. And then we discuss and talk it between us. In fact, there are so many things out there. But as you study this book will help you. Now, a little bit of that movie that you watched, you realize that Patrick was the Seventh-day Adventist? He was Sabbath keeper. And if you want to read more about what they've said, did you see the name of the book that he represented? Yeah, Truth Triumph. Yeah. There's a book out there by Wilkerson. And there's some interesting stories out there. In fact, we need to study this book because out there around our places and around the world, there are people that are not reading this and they're leading us astray. Unless we know this book, we won't be ready for Jesus to come. We'll be lost. I know because I've been to different colleges and talked to them. I've found people that don't believe in the sanctuary. They don't teach it. I've talked to them that don't believe in Ellen White. I've seen that. I would tell you, there are a lot of things that are going around. But at the same time, if we study this, we will hear it. Well, I don't know. Have you ever noticed that you can smell something that doesn't smell right? You say, man, that doesn't, you know something's happening? Well, that's just the way. When you hear, if you read this, then you'll say, that doesn't chime with what that book says. You say, wait a minute. And then you follow it, then it follows. This book is the only one we can trust. And by the way, you read that book, Truth Triumph, it'll tell you about how this book came about. Did you know that there are 2 basic channels? One was Alexandria, and the other was Antioch. One group came through Antioch with the Receptus Bible. The other came through the other one, which are the liberal Bibles that have a lot of garbage in them. But if you get one of those books, you'll find there is so much interest in how this book came about and how this Bible came about. I'm going to tell you, it's exciting. People gave their lives to this book. Many, many. And we may be faced with some of these issues too. But I want to tell you, I believe Jesus is coming so soon. Now, there are more stories I could tell you about AWR and what it's doing. There are so many stories. God is working miracles all around the world, but he's coming. And I want you all to be there because I want to see you in that long marriage family celebration, the marriage table. Remember, it's miles long. And I want to see you better than I can see you here. I want to see you occur at that end. Let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, as you are here, I ask that you would bless each one. Help us to give our hearts totally to you. We ask forgiveness of our sins, that we can be in tune to your still small voice. and that you will guide us and direct us every day. We ask in your precious name, Jesus. Amen. Now our closing